Alright, so today we are back in our PropertyLimBrothers studio and welcome to our next episode of So Far So Good, the PropertyLimBrothers podcast. And today I'm with Adrian Lim, my brother Lim, and PropertyLimBrothers. And welcome to our studio too. And we have a very special guest today. And we have Eugene Soo with us. And before I get Eugene to introduce himself a little bit, and then we kickstart this session to talk a little bit about estate planning and as well as the property market and stuff like that. Let me just give you a brief of some of the things that Eugene has done and accomplished. And so Eugene is a member of the Society of Will Writers, and he has been in the financial industry for almost a decade. And guess what? In his first year of his career, he was awarded the prestigious $1 Million Roundtable, among other form of accolades. And currently, Eugene is an expert beyond financial consulting. He now specializes in estate planning in the form of wills and legacy in order to meet the needs of his higher net worth clientele. And also, he's a regular contributor to media. He writes a lot to local publications and has been interviewed a couple of times on MediaCorp, Channel U, on Money Week, and on radio talk show like 93.8 Live, MoneyWise. And he's also a frequent speaker at the Financial and Estate Planning Seminar, where he shares his knowledge with the audience on estate planning and also with a lot of different corporate companies and insurance companies as well. So till date, he has established close to 150 family trusts, and he strongly believes in creating a blueprint to secure your legacy for your loved ones. And he's also an author of his book. And what's the name of the book, Eugene?
The book is Legacy of Love.
Legacy of Love. All right, great. And Eugene, why don't you share with our audience a little bit on what you do currently, just to give you an update apart from what we've just introduced you.
Wow, thank you, Melvin, for the warm introduction. And thank you, Adrian, for being here with me.
Welcome, Eugene.
I've been pretty busy lately in basically meeting families, meeting the super higher net worth, the mass affluent, to do up their estate planning, to make sure that the wealth that they have assumed and they have amassed can be passed down to the next generation.
Right.
So yeah, this year has been pretty great so far for Q1.
Right.
More and more people starting to find out more about such services.
Right.
And so that's pretty much what I've been doing.
Right. So over the past couple of years, you have been mainly specializing in estate planning and sharing your expertise with the market and helping your clients, I assume.
Yeah. So actually, I started off in the financial industry.
Right.
So I had a brief background. And a couple of years, I worked very hard.
Right.
And thankfully, managed to achieve certain kind of credentials from that. But as time passes, so start to realize that our clients basically need more help in terms of distribution of their wealth.
Right.
So that's where I was at a gridlock where I needed to help them.
Right.
But yet, at the same time, there was actually a shortage of such services in the market.
Right.
So that was where I began to roll up my sleeves and go and study, research, and met lots of people.
Right.
And so fast forward to today, I'm still happily doing that.
Right. So Eugene has been a close friend, and also we have seen him grew his business over the years. So maybe just a brief backdrop, Eugene. So probably we want to start off with when you first started out in the financial planning industry. I mean, how old were you back then?
Wow, that was like yesterday. I actually started about close to 12, 13 years ago when but amazingly, I started in my final year when I was doing my grad studies.
Right.
So I still remember I interned at this company and I was there listening to how they pitch to the young graduates.
Right.
So I was particularly, when I was seated there, I was like, wow, I'm just going to do this because it seems like something that I can do.
Right.
And I'm in sales. So I began to join them even before I graduate. Being the typical Singaporean,
Right.
I was thinking that if all else fails, in sales, we always say, what's the plan B? So if all else fails, when I graduate, I would have still a degree.
Right.
So I began to kickstart my business, my financial planning business, in year 3.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And how long was the degree? Was it a 3 or 4 year degree?
My degree was a 3-year degree.
Right. So in the third year, you actually already started while you were studying the final year.
Yeah, that's right.
Right, right. And at that time, when you started off in the financial planning industry, what were some of the key challenges as a very young professional coming into the market? What are some of the key challenges that you faced?
Well, I've actually put that aside, but it's good to remind me of those because that really motivates me as I wake up every day.
Right.
I mean, I still remember, in the final year, I was a nobody because I didn't have any credentials.
Right.
I mean, of course, not to speak about experience.
Right.
And certainly, I didn't have a network.
Right.
These are the 3 primary ingredients when you talk about business.
Right.
Especially if you are a startup and you really need to get things moving fast.
Mm.
So what I was really focused on back then was, of course, my own network of friends. But more than that, I began to ask myself, like, if I want to really gain their trust,
Right.
I need to be able to first establish myself confidently in
Right.
front of this person.
Right.
So that's why I started to find out more about how to speak confidently, how to be confident even though you are not there yet,
Right.
how to think like you are there, you are a
Right.
successful entrepreneur.
Right.
And I guess that, that really helped me a lot because when my friends and their referrals saw me,
Right.
they were comfortable. I mean, thank God, they were comfortable in my approach.
Right. Right.
And, one thing at a time, and that led me, more things came along and I started to build based on what I had.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And for estate planning, right? How many years already have you ran that estate planning kind of business, and then how many years have you been serving your clients in this arena?
It's close to 10 years
Right.
in estate planning.
Right. So why do you think like maybe you can share also with our audience like what is the relationship of estate planning? Because Eugene is also a property investor as well.
Right.
He owns properties, and why do you think estate planning is a very key important factor in the journey of somebody that is owning, whether it's 1 or 2 properties or maybe more? And how do you see it? Or maybe you can just explain in a generic term, like what is estate planning all about?
Well, estate planning involves a main part of it in properties, right?
Right.
The main reason is because properties form a huge part of our balance sheet.
Right.
So whenever I meet clients and they are ready, to draft out whether it's their will, their trust, or whatever distribution, one common headache or one common gridlock would always be what is to be done to the property.
Right.
So when the clients are alive, of course they will be staying they'll be residing and they gain the full ownership. But when something happens to them, the big question is that who will inherit the property?
Right. Right.
So so most of the time is spent in discussing how would their next line, their offsprings will come in to inherit the property, to make use as a property, either investment or whether as a shelter. So these are the common questions that part of estate planning that ties intertwined with property investing.
Right.
Right. So Eugene, how do your high net worth clients use property as a vehicle for estate planning?
Well, I guess because based on the cases that I've seen in Asia, particularly, we can't avoid properties. So
Right.
you can invest in whatever instruments you have based on your preference, your risk tolerance. But property here in Singapore and in the region is something that we can't escape from.
Right. Because we as Asians, property is also, it's not just a shelter over our heads. It's also a form of asset
Exactly.
preservation, plus I think it's something that everybody will hope to own the moment that they start out in the professional world. Right.
Yeah.
Yep. So
So the question about how how clients actually relate to the properties would be they would want pretty much to hand down properties over to the next of kin.
Right.
But the big question is that how.
Right.
Yeah. So in fact, they would want their loved ones to keep their properties as a sentimental value and to use it for shelter, for dividends, and not to sell them.
Right.
I see.
Yeah.
Right. So it's more for people who wants to create that kind of legacy on the property that they own. and to have something that's already pre-planned, right? So usually, based on your experience, what is the age group of people that will actually start to do estate planning? Like what is the range and the median age that you see? I mean, across your 10 years of experience.
Well, that's a very interesting question, Melvin, because
Right.
I mean, it shifts from 10 years ago till now.
Right.
Everything has shifted.
Right.
In the beginning, when I first started, that was like 9 years back. Of course, I will go for. I mean, I have more clients coming in where they are in their 50s and their 60s.
Right.
But in today's context, I can see anyone from the age of like late 20s.
Late 20s, all right.
Late 20s.
Right.
Yeah, and all the way up to like in their 70s, even in their 80s.
Right,
Yeah.
right. So it's a huge different array of age bandwidth that you have seen. But usually is it mostly when people start to enter into their 40s or 50s that they will start to be more serious about this? Like what is the highest percentage that you have seen?
Yeah, so I mean it's a broad range, but if there's one particular segment, it will always be between either the early 40s or probably in the 60s.
Right, right. So how about yourself? I mean, what do you recommend? I mean, in terms of like people who is intending to do will and estate planning, right? What will be the right moment to start planning ahead?
The best moment, the right moment to plan ahead.
Yeah.
I guess it's a moving target. So planning for estate planning is always moving, it's always changing because every day is different by itself.
Right.
So the best time to plan will always be today,
right,
or yesterday.
Right.
More exact. But you review and you make changes to that on a daily or on a quarterly basis.
Right.
And that would be the most up to date plan.
Right. Right. Yeah. So I think we also we are very interested to know like as a business owner and then as a specialist in the financial planning plus estate planning industry, how do you see property, as a form of investment personally for yourself? And maybe Adrian can ask Eugene some of these questions.
Yeah, so being a property investor yourself, so what are the key considerations when it comes to property purchase, be it for investment or for own stay?
Well, I will not classify myself as an expert or a very but based on the experience that I have, and of course with my clients due to my work,
Right.
I think the factors would definitely be, the factors to consider. If it's for own stay, of course, the standard stuff you guys probably know.
Right. Based on your personal needs and stuff.
Yeah,
right.
for more practical reasons. But for investment point of view, I basically think that whether it's local, it's global, it should be something that you are familiar with, something that you are certain, even if you don't revisit in the next 1 to 2 years, nothing much will change.
Right.
So you got to be close to the investment to be able to react accordingly.
Right.
But of course, other factors to me, investment would be something that I know, for example, the needs of the people, the market trends.
Right.
So take for example, like lately I was just asking around, and I have a client who is willing to pass down a beautiful home, to his children.
Right.
So he was just saying that, well, this property is worth more than 10 mil.
Right.
And who wouldn't want to stay in such a property?
Right.
Then I was just asking him a question casually. I said, do you know that most of the places right now, they have integrated, integrated with a shopping mall.
Right.
It's more convenient.
Right.
And they may be smaller, but it's definitely trendy. Do you think your children will want to stay there instead of where you are living behind? And then the client starts to think about it and say, oh yeah, you are right. I don't think my daughter will want to stay here compared to where her friends are living, in Heartland and all that. So so factors to consider would primarily be based on market trends. What is something that the next generation would like, or even particularly for myself.
Right.
Do I like to stay here?
Right.
Not just the location, but the style, whether there are malls nearby.
Right. Like, so based on what I hear, Eugene, is that your personal preference will be whether is it for own stay or is it for investment property. You usually will want to foresee like what will be the future preference of the future target audience.
Yeah.
I mean, in the event if you do want to exit from the property, you want to make sure like there is like a ready target audience that will like the property as well to buy from resale market, right? So I mean, personally, for your own properties, I mean, do you have any like a specific ranking in terms of some of the factors that you will definitely want to have when you select a property? I mean, some people they say that I definitely want to have a freehold property, or some people they don't mind a 99 years if let's say it's very close to integrated development or mall and stuff like that. So what are probably like some of the 2-3 factors that is a definitely must tick off from your checkbox before you actually will buy a property?
Well, I must admit that I'm a pretty lazy investor.
Right.
So I do not like to read and overread.
Right. Define a lazy investor.
Yeah,
Right.
meaning to say I would not want to like at least wake up, or maybe every Sunday morning I have to flip up the papers and review my investment.
Right.
So with respect to property, I'm a ease person, right? So
Right.
So you talk about location, talk about the direction and all that. I feel more comfortable if my investment, the property,
Buying
is
the
in
east.
in the east.
Right.
Because I am more familiar. You see, every time I go shopping and I go purchase some groceries or whatsoever, I would go to a mall in the east. So I would be
Right.
able to see what are the latest developments,
Right.
whether is it crowded.
Right.
Yeah. So these are the things that will give me a sense of security that I know my investments are doing well.
Okay. All right.
But if it's in the west, like for example,
Right.
very far away place, I probably will only go there once every 2-3 years.
Right.
So I will not be kept up to date. So that's my definition of being lazy.
Right. So something that you're familiar with,
Yeah.
and then that you can review it on a very normal approach that you can get to see and feel and touch based on the surroundings. Right. Okay. Great. And how about like over this past 10 years, right? In terms of coming back to the topic of estate planning, what are probably is there a particular scenario that you have seen and experienced before? I mean, of course, we understand the importance of confidentiality, but maybe just a case study that you think has ascertained yourself to really be a deep believer of doing estate and will planning. Like, what are some of the case studies that you have seen that you just feel that is really that so important, and then you always share with your clients on this few scenarios?
Right. Okay. So, the closest that I can really recall and to share with the audience is that there is this client who he has properties.
Right.
And he has like lots of shop houses renting out. And then of course he has his children, his wife.
Right.
So the question that I posed to him was that, should something happen? Because in estate planning we talk about that all the time. Should something happen?
Right.
So, what is your plan B? Who would take charge of all these assets? Right. So he began to think for a long while. And after coming back to me, he asked me this, gave me this answer. He said, Eugene, I don't have an answer for that. Can you tell me what do people do? Right. So, of course, I didn't answer him outrightly, but I was just telling him that the best way is to really ask the beneficiaries, do they want to continue the portfolio? Or do they want to receive liquid cash? Right. Because, everything is in his sole name right now. Okay. The moment where he passes on and he passes down to the next generation, all of them will become co-owners. Okay. And, they have to decide unanimously, which can be a tricky issue.
Tricky issue, right. Right. So, what usually happens when somebody don't do so-called like will or estate planning for probably, let's say if a person owns like a 2 or 3 property kind of portfolio, what's going to happen based on the laws in Singapore? Like if they don't do a will planning on these properties, usually what is the flow of inheritance?
Okay. Right. So, I mean, thankfully we're in Singapore. There's a default ISA, we call that the Interstate Succession Act. Right. That will apply immediately, right? So the rights of the property and the rest of the assets will go to your family members, your children 50, your wife 50, depends on which hierarchy. Right. But when you do that, there are a lot of complications. Right. Because you have minors, which are children. at stake, and you even have individuals who already probably have their own HDBs.
Right.
And here they need to inherit private property. So there are a lot of questions that will surface. And in the past, most people wouldn't want to dive into all these kind of complications, and they would say,
sensitive and
yeah,
right.
I'll just leave it to my, my children or my brother-in-law to decide. But more often than not now, when you flip open the papers, there are so many court cases that talk about simple stuff.
Right. Disputes and all that.
Yeah.
Right.
So even just a couple of months ago, there was a judgment that passed. Both siblings took over a property from their deceased dad, but they went to court just because one of the siblings brought in a golden retriever, a dog.
Okay.
Yeah. So
into the property.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So they were arguing, and so such things happen.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And then they want to sell the property and stuff.
They are both co-owners,
right?
And they are suing each other because they feel that they don't have the rights to decide whether a dog can be allowed.
Wow. Okay. Okay.
That's interesting.
Right. So usually, for this type of situation, how do people plan? I mean, like people with 2 or 3 properties, do they normally plan for one property to go to one child, or what is the common arrangement, or what is the recommended arrangement? Is it based on percentage, or is it based on per property to each child, so that it's more clean cut and stuff like that?
Yeah, usually, every client is different.
Right.
Usually, I will propose them, if they can, to make sure that each child gets a property each.
Right.
So never ever split the inheritance in terms of the property.
In the same property.
Yeah,
right.
that's
because
right.
that is where conflict comes up.
Exactly.
Right.
But of course, there will be certain checklists that the client will go through.
Right.
If their children are of age, or their beneficiaries are of age, then one of the common things is to really sit them down and say, if something happens, do you want a property? If not, you want cash?
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So it's always good to consult the beneficiary to get some insights.
Right. To have a conversation, so that it's easier for your planning and stuff.
Yeah.
Right.
But of course, if that information is not available, that for some reason the children are too young, or he wants to keep it like a close secret to the beneficiary, which I could understand why.
Right.
Then the most obvious reasons would be to really think, based on the best case scenario.
Right.
How can you split? Maybe, for example, one of the beneficiary will inherit the cash and the investments of equal amount.
Right. Right. Great.
Yeah.
I think that's great information. And before we talk a little bit more about property questions from Adrian, right? Because today Adrian is in charge of all the property questions for Eugene. And sometimes we do have clients of so-called we do have Muslim clients as well that will ask us on advice particularly on this area.
Yeah.
Are you able to share with us a little bit on how does estate planning works for Muslim clients? And because I believe the default rule is the Interstate Succession Act, right? But for Muslim, it will be under the Sharia law, right? So are you able to share a little bit about that part? Like usually, how do you advise Muslim clients on estate planning?
Okay, pretty much for Muslim clients, you're right in saying that they are subjected under the Sharia law.
Right.
So the way how they plan is the same. Nothing changes.
Right.
The only difference is that if they choose not to do anything about it, then there's a more elaborated law that will step in to dictate how the assets will be flowing.
Right.
And more often than not, we are in the 21st century. Most clients, they are not very comfortable with those laws because maybe times have changed, but the laws have not changed.
Right.
So to answer the question, the asset planning process and the considerations are the same.
Right.
It's just that if they don't do that, there will be more consequence to
going back to the default laws. Right. Okay. So do you see an increased amount of Muslim clientele coming to you over the years, like on this part?
Yeah, by and large, I would not say a drastic increase, but there are a couple more clients asking.
Right.
Yeah, and that's where we work with Muslim lawyers who are focusing on this area.
Right.
So after we dictate, how you want to plan. We just pass on to them.
Right.
Then you will draft in accordance to the requirement.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, that's great. Yeah, so probably Adrian ask a little bit more property questions.
Sure,
Yeah.
Eugene. So, how do you see the property market in the short to mid-term?
Well, that's a question that I've prepared to ask you guys later.
Right.
Yeah.
I think, in my personal opinion, I think the volatility is here to stay, not just regards to property, but in all aspects of investments.
Right.
And, we are living in a very uncertain, volatile era right now.
Right.
But so short to mid-term, definitely there will be a lot of volatility.
Right.
But I would say that, in Singapore, where home ownership is
very
high, we are less sensitive to the global, changes. So home ownership and, people need to get a home. When they get married, they need to get a home.
Right.
And of course, after the property, appreciates, after 5-year MOP, they would need a bigger place.
Right.
Because I went through the process that I need a bigger place when you have kids.
Right.
So I think these are the very strong core pillars of home ownership that will build stability into the local market.
Right.
And of course, the short to mid term. Of course, mid to long term, then it will really be dependent on the stability in Singapore.
Right.
Amongst the neighboring countries.
Right.
Which I'm still positive.
Right.
That's
Yeah.
great.
Right. Yeah. So we have also shared in some of our investors and our Ask series on YouTube. Is that Singapore is really different now compared to 14 years back when we started in the real estate market, because now we have seen 7 to 8 rounds of cooling measures already being priced into the current market. So we believe that, and based on what we have seen over the past years, is that this has then became like a stability kind of pillar in the pricing index itself. And yes, we totally agree with Eugene. Like Singapore has such a high level of ownership in terms of home. I mean, people have kids. They live near to their workplace. They live near to their parents. So and I think one thing that's great is the government has also came out with the LTV of 25%, ABSD, seller stamp duty. All these pillars has stabilized the market. Although now it is a little bit harder to invest in additional residential properties, but I think over the long run, even if there's going to be any form of like short-term so-called pressure coming from the global market, I mean the government can then tweak or release these cooling measures just to stabilize the market back again.
Yes, indeed.
Right. So yeah, Adrian, any other property questions for Eugene?
Maybe for our audience, would you like to share about your portfolio with us?
Okay.
Okay, is that sensitive?
Yeah.
Well,
I mean, you don't have to tell us the address and the unit number. Like, that's just
Yeah,
usually
that's
like
general.
what kind of properties are you interested in? Like roughly, what have you bought and stuff?
yeah. I'm a very practical person, so the places that I have generally would be the places that I used to stay.
Right.
I mentioned about upgrading and all that. So
Right.
whenever we upgrade, for myself, I would choose to hold a place.
Right.
Well, call it sentimental or call it some other reasons, but we just choose to see, hey, do we have the ability to buy another place yet
Right.
retaining the old place?
Right.
So inevitably, those have became my portfolio.
Right.
And of course, in a commercial space, I'm not like an avid investor, but it is really for practical reasons.
Right, right. That's right.
In Singapore, places that you need to use, it's better off to buy it than to rent.
Right.
This is like the old school theory that my parents taught me.
Right.
True.
Right. So you buy your own office as well.
So some of them, we try to have a stake rather than we rent. But of course, some we rent because in Singapore,
Right. Rental is expensive.
yeah,
in
rent is
CBD.
expensive.
Right. So am I right to say that you have never ever sold a property before in your life? Because you buy and hold.
Kind of. Not
Right.
yet. Not yet.
Right. Right.
Oh, so you haven't sold any properties from us yet?
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Great. So Eugene is having a buy and hold kind of strategy. I mean, of course, we have clients. We have a lot of clients who buy and then if as they do better in their professional work life in business, they hold and then they rent out, which is a good long-term strategy.
Yeah.
And so coming back to a little bit more about how you run your business as well. I think because you started off as an entrepreneur in the financial planning field as a professional. So have you ever worked for somebody before, like as an employed person?
Well, I did tons of part-time jobs.
Right. Yes.
I do not know whether it's included.
Right.
But not in a real full-time employment.
Right.
So, but pretty much a lot of different part-time positions.
Yeah, I still remember the one of my very first part-time work was with Eugene when we were like Sec 1 or Sec 2.
Well, that's pretty young.
So we went to this shopping center called Upper Serangoon Shopping Center.
Oh, I know the place.
And then we saw a vendor that sells a lot of Christmas cards and Chinese New Year cards. And then we told the uncle, hey uncle, can we buy in bulk from you? And then we want to sell it. And so the uncle sold us in bulk and then give us that, what is that? There was a machine for you to key in the price tag.
Yeah.
And that was our first door knocking experience. And then we went to the neighborhood in the whole Hougang area, and then we start door knocking, and then we sell to the families and stuff. So that was our very first sales experience last time.
Wow.
Yeah. So of course, Eugene, I think he has done tons of part-time work when he was young, and probably that's why he has went on to the sales profession in financial planning as well. Yeah. So maybe Eugene, can you share with us like what are some of your personal so-called like habits in terms of productivity, especially as a business owner over the past 10 over years? What are probably 2 to 3 things that you always strongly hold on to in order to have a massive production in terms of your personal productivity, your own discipline to run your business and stuff like that?
Okay. I'll try to take this question.
Right.
Well, back the days where you reminded me about how we sold greeting cards door to door, and now I remember that Melvin also introduced me to this business to sell Vitagen or 𝗕𝗿liche𝗽𝗍𝗿𝗆. And it's an amazing business with back then, quite high.
I don't remember that, but now that you say that, I think I remember it because just a backstory. How I began selling Vitagen was because I wanted. No, it all started because we saw one of our friends having this like new Pentium computer PC. It was playing like FIFA 96, and then I saw like, wow, the game is so great. So I told my dad, I said I want to buy my first PC, and then he said that okay, he will only sponsor me $500. The rest of the $2,500 I have to pay by installment. So I said I will work as a Vitagen delivery boy for 2 years to pay that installment every month. Yeah, and then I think Eugene saw it, and then he said, hey, can you introduce me the vendor? So I introduced him, the Vitagen manager. Yeah. So how long do you distribute Vitagen? Do you remember?
I don't know. I did probably about a year.
Right.
Door knocking. I mean, there are some regular customers, and we went door knocking to buy more, supplying to sell more.
Right.
But now after so many years, if you ask me like, what is it that really keeps me motivated in business? And I think the foundation goes all a long way back to where we first started.
Right.
I mean, first of all, for me to get click up with Melvin back in Sec 1, that's 13 years old.
Right.
I believe you need to be attracted to the right people. Because the topics that you speak, the motivation that you give, the ideas that you have, they all revolve around the people.
Right.
So for me, I can be upset, I can be down, but I cannot hang around with negative people.
Right.
So that is my number one, pet peeve that I cannot stand.
Right.
I will exit the room. I will find other reasons to get out.
Right.
So that's one, to get around healthy people.
Right.
Regardless of how the business sentiment is. There's always, we always talk about how you find opportunities in crisis.
Right.
You need to get around these people.
Right.
Then, of course, in summary, the next thing that I really focus on a lot is about managing yourself as a person, because sometimes when you are very driven, you tend to overlook the who you are, and you tend to go beyond what you can do.
Right.
That's where aggression comes in.
Right.
So for me, I try to maintain a balance in my life.
Right.
So, I mean, of course, being in business, but beyond that, I have time for my, like, for example, I'm very heavily involved in my church
Right.
and my family, and of course in business. So because of that, every part of me needs to operate at a high capacity.
Right.
So I choose not to let myself do nothing, because when you do nothing, your mind is empty. That's where laziness steps in.
Right.
Yeah. So I guess at the end of the day, when I plan, like for example, this season or this year, it's important to first like goal setting. Ask yourself, what are the things that you want to do and you want to accomplish,
Right.
and then you start to fit into your schedule, and you have a game plan. Say, okay, I will go out and I'll do that, and then you have no space and no opportunity for laziness to come in.
Right.
And that, I believe, is where focus comes in as a byproduct.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
So to sum it up, like the 2 or 3 things that you believe in. Number one is, of course, to be positive, and then to choose the right friends and the right people to surround yourself with, and always coming from a solution-based approach, rather than dwelling on the problems and being negative and stuff. And number 2 is really being focused to operate on very high capacity, and plus to have advanced planning on the year ahead. What do you want to accomplish as a business person and stuff like that, right? So, so going to this topic, I think very interestingly is that now, since we're in March 2020, what are some of the goals that you have for your business for the year ahead? I mean, for the next 9 months.
That's good, because now it's in March, so I am still on track.
Right.
So the things that I plan to do this year would be really to fight for more time.
Right.
To be able to operate at a high capacity, but yet to carve out more time.
Right.
So of course, this is an important thing that everybody wants, but the question is how.
Right. Right.
So of course, it's to outsource the things that I can do, but I don't need to do it. Other people can do it.
Right.
So outsource to the task to people, and of course that means that I have to train more.
Right.
So I've been trying to train up people and to outsource to look for partners.
Right.
So these are some of the things that I've been trying to do. So my 2020 goal is to have more time compared to my 2019, 2018.
Right.
But yet the results have to progress.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So it's really at your current capacity. How do you train up more people that runs alongside with you, and then to scale up the business?
Yeah.
Right. So Adrian, are there any other questions for Eugene?
I think that's great.
Okay, so actually I have just couple of one to 2 questions, right, for Eugene. Is that I mean, as a business owner for the past 12 to 13 years, we've talked about your productivity, we've talked about your property investment journey, and at the same time being an expert in your field, right? So sometimes, I mean, in the real estate market, we also we also train our own agents, we also train our own salespeople, and we're advocates of being going into very deep into a specific field that you are doing. Just like being a surgeon in the medical field, we want to specialize. So based on what we have seen you done, is that we find that you have really like became an expert in estate planning in this field. So do you believe in specialization?
Right. Yeah, definitely. I think in today's context, you need to know not just one thing. You need to know a couple of things.
Right.
But yet at the same time, you need to know where are you specialized in.
Right.
So specialization is something that I espouse and I strongly advocate.
Right.
Because that is what you breathe. That is what, when people identify you, they identify who you are.
Your niche market.
Yeah, they don't identify you as being, okay, you can do A, B, C, D, E, but they identify you that you are an expert in E or D.
Right.
And, if I need something, I'll definitely go for you.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And what would be your advice, especially for young entrepreneurs, whether they're coming into the sales profession or they're coming into the wealth management profession? Like, what will be probably just 1 to 2 advice for young people, whether in their early 20s or maybe they're doing a mid-career switch, right? Like, what is your advice to them in terms of coming into this field? What kind of mindset do they need to have?
Okay. I mean, apart from what I just shared earlier, that 2 points, my last take would be stay hungry and don't be complacent when you do well.
Right.
That's a very good point.
Yeah.
Right.
So one thing that I normally do is that, I mean, we are all humans.
Right.
So sometimes we can be over complacent, we can
Right.
be enjoying.
Over the top and
Yeah, over the top, like what you mentioned. So I will always have this meter gauge in me and I say, am I still hungry, like
to
as
learn
I first
and-
started?
right.
Yeah, and somehow, how do you know that you have that? Is that when there are things to learn, there are things to explore, there are new ideas, somehow, no matter how tired you are, you just get up and you want to share with somebody. Normally, I share with my wife,
Right.
and she will know that I am ready.
Right.
So this is how you know more about yourself, what keeps you going.
Right. Right. Thank you, Eugene. And before we end off, maybe just one final tip for our audience with regards to estate planning. What will be your advice to especially our audience who have already owned 1, 2, or 3 properties? Like, why do you think estate planning is a very crucial planning tool? And then where can they get information? What is your website and stuff like that? And how do they reach out to you?
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, I always say this, estate planning is never done for yourself, but for your loved ones.
Right.
So it's not whether you need it or not, but it's a question whether you have loved ones that you are leaving behind for.
Right.
And I mean, if you want to read up more, I do write routine articles, and you can check that out on my Facebook or on my website. It's called Securing Generations.
Securing
Generations.
Generations. Right.
That's
So,
right.
so your website is it securinggenerations.com.sg?
That's right.
All right, great. So head on to Eugene's website. You can also look for him on LinkedIn. Just key in Eugene Soo. You'll be able to see his experience in this field, plus a lot of the articles that he wrote. He actually posted up on his LinkedIn platform as well as his Facebook and website. So we're very honored and happy to have Eugene Soo with us today.
Thank you. Indeed.
Right, and
Thank
to
you,
chat
Eugene.
about his business journey, leadership as a young entrepreneur until today as an expert in the estate planning arena, and also very glad for him to spend his precious time with us this afternoon right
You're
here
welcome.
at the
Thank you,
PropertyLimBrothers
Eugene.
studio. All right,
Yep.
so I think it's a wrap up. So usually when we wrap up, we just wave to the camera and then,
Okay.
all right, so we'll end off. Thank you very much. See you guys.
Bye.
See you.
I hope you guys enjoyed this episode of our So Far So Good podcast series with PropertyLimBrothers. Now leave a comment down below and let us know your thoughts about today's episode. And cheers.